What's up YouTube? Danny Boy EDH back with another Commander deck tech video. Today we got Preston the Vanisher, a legendary rabbit wizard for 3 and a white. It's a 2/5 that says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't cast, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's a 0/1 white illusion. That ability will basically allow us to double up on our ETB effects when we're blinking, flickering, or reanimating things. And for 1 and a white, we can sacrifice 5 illusions to exile target non-land permanent. So basically we got a lot of flicker type effects in this deck, looking to capitalize on ETB triggers, potentially with a combo ending by way of Alter the Brood. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills a card. So with some infinite loops we can mill out our opponent's libraries and win the game that way. Otherwise, just trying to get a lot of value out of our creatures entering the battlefield and making copies of them. So it's a pretty creature-based deck. We'll start off with Esper Sentinel to draw some cards, and Weathered Wayfarer to search for lands. Oreskos Explorer, Knight of the White Orchid, Loyal Warhound, and Ambitious Farmhand will all search up basic Plains cards. Actually, Knight of the White Orchid is any Plains card. So you can get some non-basic Plains that way. We got Wall of Omens and Spirited Companion for card draw. Rafine's Informant connives when it enters the battlefield, so you can draw a card and discard a card, getting some card selection. Wall of Mourning, when it enters the battlefield, exile a card from the top of your library face down for each opponent you have. And at the beginning of your end step, if you control creatures with 3 or more different powers, you get to put one of those cards into your hand. Archivist of Ogma can draw you a card and gain a life whenever opponent searches their library. And these are the type of effects that if you're blinking them and you create extra copies, you're drawing 2 or more cards at a time. Leonin Relic Warder will exile target artifact or enchantment when it enters the battlefield. Suture Priest will gain you a life when a creature enters under your control, and your opponents will lose a life when a creature enters under their control. So if you have multiple copies of Suture Priest, that'll start getting out of hand. Recruiter of the Guard will search your library for any creature card with toughness 2 or less, and you can put it into your hand. Welcoming Vampire and Mentor of the Meek will draw you cards whenever creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield, and the token copies are 0/1, so all your token copies will trigger these. Rumor Gatherer will scry you a card whenever a creature enters, and if it resolves a second time you get to draw a card, and then from there on you'll just go back to scrying. For some more ETB draw, we have these 3 creatures: Priest of Ancient Lore, Inspiring Overseer, and Roving Harper. All have ETB draw. Usually paying 3 mana for that effect is not great, but you're able to do it multiple times, so it's definitely worth it to have these in there. We got Banisher Priest and Fiend Hunter to remove our opponent's creatures temporarily. And if you're able to flicker Fiend Hunter before the ability resolves, you can actually just exile creatures without returning them, because the trigger to return the creature will happen before the creature is actually exiled, so you're able to just remove things permanently that way. Lauren of the Third Path will destroy a artifact or enchantment when it enters, and you can also draw a card with target opponent by way of tapping it. Moonblessed Cleric will search your library for any enchantment card and put it to the top of your library. And Flicker Wisp will exile another target creature and return it, or it's actually another target permanent return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step to either mess up your opponent's stuff or to get some more ETBs. And here we've got the 4-drop Flicker Gang. We got Felidar Guardian, Restoration Angel, and Icewind Stalwart. And if you have either two of these on the battlefield, and along with Preston, you can basically get an infinite series of ETBs going, because, say, Felidar Guardian enters, you create a token that is a copy, or you flicker the Icewind Stalwart. So it enters, you blink this, back and forth, and you just get an additional 0/1 every time. And Felidar Guardian will exile another target permanent, so you can use the extra triggers to bounce your lands and create infinite mana, draw your library, do whatever your ETBs allow you to do to win the game. Solemn Simulacrum will grab basic lands and put them onto the battlefield, and it'll draw you a card when it dies. Luminous Broodmoth will protect your creatures that don't have flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield with a flying counter on it. So this is actually returning the card to the battlefield, so that will work with Preston because the creature was not cast. So you'll double up on your ETBs there. And we have Mondrak Glory Dominus. Whenever one or more tokens would be created, create twice that many instead. Basically, Anointed Procession on a stick. And you can sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures and pay 3 or sacrifice things to put an indestructible counter on it. Elesh Norn will double up on all the ETB triggers and negate our opponent's triggers. Rambunctious Mutt to destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. Paying 5 for a disenchant is not great, but I think being able to repeat this effect, you definitely get a lot of value out that, especially in a commander game when you have 3 or more opponents. Solitude will Swords to Plowshares a creature when it enters, and you can also evoke it by exiling a white card from your hand. Karmic Guide to reanimate a creature from the graveyard, which will also trigger the Preston. So you'll get not only the creature returning, but also another token copy of it. And Reverent Hoplite and Evangel of Heliod both create a number of 1/1 soldier tokens equal to our devotion to white when it enters. So that can get quite out of hand once you're flickering these. And especially if you have something like the Suture Priest, you'll be gaining a lot of life along the way. Sun Titan to enter the battlefield and return a 3-drop from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's another non-cast ETB that will work with Preston. Angel of Serenity enters the battlefield, exile up to 3 other creatures from the battlefield or creature cards from graveyards. So you can remove your opponent's creatures effectively, and if you don't have good targets, you can also return stuff from your graveyard to your hand when this leaves. And Luminate Primordial enters the battlefield. For each opponent, you get to Swords to Plowshares 1 creature each of your opponent's controls. So that's it for the creatures. We will move next into the artifact department. Altar of the Brood is probably one of the better ones I've showed you already. We got Soul Ring, Thought Vessel, and Mind Stone for our artifact ramp. And surprisingly, the maximum hand size removal can be quite useful here. Altar of Dementia is another mill outlet if you're creating infinite tokens to win the game. If you don't have Altar of the Brood, you can use Altar of Dementia. Archaeomancer's Map, when an ETB, search for 2 basic planes and put them into your hand. And whenever a land enters under an opponent's control, If that player controls more lands than you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield. Panharmonicon, a must-add, I would say, to this deck. If an artifact or creature enters, causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that triggers an additional time. So all your ETB effects will be getting doubled. And then we also have Conjurer's Closet, which at your end step, you exile a creature and return it to the battlefield for your repeatable ETB/token generation. And now we'll move into the enchantments. Tokasia's Welcome will draw a card whenever a creature with mana value 3 or less enters. Anointed Procession to double up your token generation. And Teleportation Circle is basically a Conjurer's Closet on an enchantment that costs 1 less. We have Cathar's Crusade to put +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures whenever one enters. This can be a little counterproductive when you're blinking things because you'll be removing the counters, but when you have some of those army in a can type of cards like the token generators, you can be putting a lot of counters on your creatures. And Blessed Sanctuary, whenever a non-token creature enters, create a 2/2 white unicorn creature token. And it also has prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and creatures you control, which is pretty good. And it also works with the token doubling type of effects. We have Ephemerate and Cloud Shift to blink things for 1 mana. And Ephemerate will also rebound on your next upkeep. You get another blink. Enlightened Tutor to grab our Panharmonicon or whatever type of effect we need. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares to remove our opponent's creatures. Disenchant for more artifact and enchantment removal at instant speed. Also, we have Generous Gift to destroy anything. Eerie Interlude will exile any number of target creatures you control and return them to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step to either evade something like a Wrath of God or Austere Command, or simply just to get a whole bunch of ETB triggers at once. Alright, so that's pretty much the deck. We have a few lands here. I really haven't fleshed out the land base as well as I could have. So I'll leave that up to you to add the best lands in here. But it's a whole bunch of basic plains, and then we have Emiria the Sky Ruin is the one I would really highly recommend. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 7 or more plains, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So in the late game, you'll basically be able to reanimate something every turn, and it also will trigger your Preston to get a token copy of it as well. Secluded Steppe is in here for cycling, and Tokasia's Dig Site to surveil 1. Not a great card, but other than that, I'm just running a bunch of basic planes. So that is it. Let me know what you think of the deck. It's definitely a fun one to play. I like the flicker type effects, and it can get kind of silly once you're making all these token copies. Fun one to play. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you on the next one.